Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. So today is an experiment. It's a new type of episode for us here at Unleashed. We got a panel discussion with four members of Umbrex, where a senior executive reached out to me the other day. She's thinking about leaving a well-paid corporate role and trying to think about how to make that decision, whether to go independent or not. And rather than just giving my own point of view, I thought it'd be interesting to put together an episode of a variety of Umbrex members to provide different perspectives on how to think through that decision process. So that's the goal for today, thinking about how do you make that decision to go independent? What are the factors to consider? What are some of the possible downsides of going independent? And let's start off. So my guests today are Jennifer Hartz, Jay Altizer, Andrew McKee, and Ashutosh Dalvi. So thank you all for joining. Why don't we start with Jennifer? Jennifer, tell us about your decision to become an independent professional.
So I'm what they call the accidental entrepreneur. I had corporate roles prior and did a couple of tours of duty at McKinsey. And I left McKinsey for a .com, which boomed and busted all in the period of 20 months. And there I was, 3.5 children and nothing, no money, no job. So luckily, folks around the community of corporate social responsibility and philanthropy reached out and said, hey, I had one client, one company reached out to me to hire me, and I was not in any position to take a job at that time. And I said, well, I'll do a project for you. And I did that. And then somebody else reached out and said, I have a project for you. Do you want to do it? So finally I thought, I think I'm supposed to make a company. Yeah, got to make a company, called my friend, the attorney, made a company. And that was in the year 2000. So I'm in my 21st year of independent consulting.
Okay, so that's the somewhat accidental route of finding your, and that's a common story. Some people, they leave one job for whatever reason, and they are maybe looking for a new role, and they start getting offered independent consulting gigs, and they like it. One leads to another, and 21 years later, they're still doing it. Yeah. Andrew, let's turn to you. Tell us about your story. How did you get into the independent world?
Yeah, thanks. Well, great question, and great to be here. So for me, starting from, I think, values and personal priorities, I was privileged to have a lot of great previous jobs, but I was on a kind of an ambitious treadmill sort of schedule for myself, and it just wasn't working with my wife, and I were having young children, and we didn't want to delegate the parenting and didn't have any family in the vicinity. I also have a lot of creative and other entrepreneurial projects where I just didn't see what's frankly become an arms race in white collar work, which is you don't work 40 hours, you work 60 to 80 if you want to make it in blah, 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 and you want to run this. So I was just looking at these options. They felt pretty unsavory. So one was, this values/personal priorities was a very big one. Second was, related was needing flexibility. And third was a dash of adventure. I had kind of tried some of the things and quit in the past, so I think I didn't have some of the hangups that some people have. If this is maybe my 5th thing that I tried and majorly changed in my life, so it was I felt like even the job I had before I quit, it was a great job, built a lot of great relationships, actually led a lot to, and it's been a great experience that I had, but it just wasn't working for me. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that I kind of joined that job knowing that I wasn't going to be there forever, because I felt like there were a lot of things about corporate jobs that just weren't that appealing to me. So,
okay,
I'll pause there for now.
Yeah. So some elements of, it sounds like it was a more deliberate decision than Jennifer. It was, wanting to have more control over your schedule, some values around taking care of your kids and being able to maybe travel less. And also point out that, I know we're before you went into consulting, we're a jazz musician, right? So you had somewhat slightly non-traditional paths before you went into consulting. let's turn to Jay. Jay, how did you get into the independent consulting world?
Look, my route was akin to Jennifer's. I had been running a business. I was a general manager, was restructured out after that company was sold. And, I really didn't, it wasn't deliberate. A friend of mine who ran strategic planning at a company knew that I, was out, and he called up and said, "Hey, if you'd rather work than mope around your house in your bunny slippers, turn up out here next week, and I've got some stuff I'd like you to work on." And so I was working as an independent within a month of being released. And then I started to develop business and call other people. And maybe a twist on it from my perspective would be I used my practice actually to avoid taking some jobs that I'm really glad I didn't take for a 3-year period. So, my practice went well. And even though it wasn't sort of a deliberate move, it certainly from a family perspective and a flexibility perspective, it really helped us out for a period of time before I then went and took another operating job. And
then you took that job, and you're back to independent consulting.
I'm back to independent consulting. Yeah. So I ran another division of a company for 2 years, which was we were having a great run. We were making significant changes to that business and running a transformation, and then that kind of came crashing down because of the effects of COVID on that industry. And then again, similarly, I really didn't deliberately at first put my shingle out, but former clients called back up, and I started having conversations with people, and I'm maybe 8 months out or something like that, and I'm on my 10th or 12th project, probably my 4th or 5th client, and which is just mostly it's just relationships. So I have been extremely fortunate.
Ashutosh, tell us a little bit about your practice, where you came from and how you got into this.
Sure. So my practice is focused on strategy and operations. I'm looking to help clients bring their strategy and operations to drive growth. I have a really unusual career. I was a consultant right out of undergrad, then was a lawyer for 5 years doing intellectual property law, went back to consulting, and was just at a point in my career where I wasn't getting to do the things that I wanted. I wanted more control over the types of clients I worked with, the type of engagements I was on, and talked to a few people in the Umbrex community that I had known from various stops in my career. And that's what really planted the seed in my head to go out on my own. And I thought about it, and I felt like it was the right challenge for me at this point in my career.
Okay. What have you found in terms of the transition was there any surprises to you of things that you weren't expecting, and either positive or negative about the transition?
Yeah, I had people tell me that you're going to feel really high highs, really low lows, and that can shift from day to day. And I didn't really believe that until I started out on my own. There are days where you meet a bunch of people and have great conversations, and then there's a couple days where it's kind of quiet. And I think what I enjoy about it is really the networking piece and getting to know people and what they are doing. What I miss about being in a larger place is having that person in the room next to you that you can talk to, go get a coffee with. But I think having a community like this has really helped out filling that void.
All right, thanks. Some other things that I've heard from other consultants I've talked to over time are some people get into independent consulting because they have some other significant activity they want to spend, a significant chunk of their time on. So for some people, that might be a musical career. On this show, I interviewed Ify Zhang, who left McKinsey and was, part of her time she was writing songs and recording songs. Some people, we have a member of the Amberx community who's writing novels. Some people have a startup that they want to do on the side, but maybe it's not taking their full time. So they do independent consulting while they're funding their startup. Or some people are caregivers, and they may either have kids they're taking care of, or elderly parents, or some other situation like that. And they're able to devote some part of each day to the consulting business consistently, but they need some extra time. There's another common reason that, I haven't heard from this group, which is just simple, like bad luck. At some firms, you can be a distinctive, top-ranked consultant, and you're building your program for partner. And I've heard this from various folks, a similar story where an associate partner at McKinsey, let's say, who's on track to make partner, they have 2 core clients, and then one of those clients gets a new CEO, and that CEO doesn't like McKinsey or just doesn't like consulting and basically shuts down all the projects, and poof, all of a sudden the person's platform for election of partner is just gone, right? Or they could have some other program, but it would mean commuting to Zurich every week, and they just aren't up for that. So that's kind of a story that I've heard before about how people make the decision, highly capable consultant, but just something, kind of some car accident kind of happened to that election. Some cons that I hear, I'd love to hear folks, share some of the pros and the cons. Some of the cons that I hear are, if you don't manage it properly, it is possible that shifting into an independent professional role could hurt your career if you are interested in getting back on the corporate ladder at some point. And that's not necessarily true, but there could be a perception that you're damaged goods, or that you did it because you couldn't get a real job, or you got fired or something, and that's why you're doing this. So, if you want to, eventually go back to the corporate, then you want to make sure that you're really branding yourself properly, that you have solid projects to show, future employers, and have solid references and so forth, if that's a transition you want to make. On the pro side, and I think Jay alluded to this, is that consulting actually can be a pathway into one of those roles, where it's a way to test out different employers and date a little bit before you get married, and have employers test you out. And sometimes they might be reluctant to hire someone directly into a, senior level full-time role that they don't know well, but it's a chance for employers to get to know you and, potentially transition you into a role. So a lot of people end up doing independent consulting for a while. They find a client they like, and they go take some C-level role there. One other downside I'll mention, and then I'll turn it back to the group here, is that professional development, you need probably to have more intentional focus on that than you do if you're at a consulting firm or in a role where you might have mentors and so forth. You got to take on that burden yourself. And one final thing is, as an independent, you need to take the responsibility to build the full infrastructure for a firm. So even though you want to be a consultant, you're also setting up invoicing and billing and insurance and LLC and taxes, and dealing with health insurance and business insurance, and setting up your email and your domain and your website and your collateral. And it's a lot of different things to be responsible for, when maybe you just prefer to be a consultant. So that's something to be aware of, that you have to take care of all that. Let's hear from the group about, if someone was asking you, a friend of yours who's, let's say, a senior vice president, making a nice, decent, comfortable salary of, exceptional salary, let's say $400,000, $500,000 a year, doing very well, is thinking about making this transition. What are some of the questions that you might ask the person, or the advice that you'd give? Jennifer, let me
All right, this is Jennifer Hartz. I'll take that. One of the problems of being a sole practitioner, or challenges of being a sole practitioner, is being sole, S-O-L-E. That means it's just you, man. And therefore, what Will just said is you have to build this infrastructure around you. So in my space, I collected graphic designers and deep researchers and branding, all sorts of people who are experts in their field to bring them in as a consultant to corporate Hartz, let them do their thing and move on. The second thing that I have is a bunch of thought leaders that I call and I say, I'm stuck, help me out. One of those thought leaders are folks from Umbrex, and some of them are folks from just the world in my life. So that is really, really important. I happen to not be an extrovert, but especially if you're an extrovert, you need to make sure there are folks around you to engage with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
It's
I totally agree.
so important. Andrew, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I was so excited to jump in. I agree. I would also ask questions around what are the individual strengths and or areas of passion and curiosity, because I think even given the reasons we just mentioned about why people go independent, I mentioned flexibility and a lot of other ones, that's not sufficient in my opinion. And you can, in other words, if you just wanted flexibility, but it turns out you don't like to do all the legwork to build a book of business and do sales / marketing, then that's going to be difficult, right? So I think it's, again, first to figure out what are you passionate about, because I think it also might, trying to answer one of your earlier questions, Will, that I think if you follow what you're passionate about and what the market is asking you to work on, meaning your clients, I think you'll continue to stay relevant. Because in my case, I've really never thought about that, but I've actually built, so right now, and I forgot some of the overview, but we have roughly 10 folks on payroll. We have another half dozen client-facing contractors, and we have a half dozen back office people at Headland. Wow. And which was a sort of 10-year growth trajectory. We've been growing modestly all this time. But I've built out experience in some functions that I never worked in, basically, like including commercial. But I've had the privilege of hiring excellent people with all the right credentials. And then by osmosis and by supervising, I've learned a ton that I could go into a commercial role. I'm in the biotech and med device side, basically the product side of healthcare. So I always recommend that. That's a way to keep the door open if you want to, and encourage you to be relevant, because if you're following the market, as Will has often said on this podcast and some of his other guests, if you're making about what the clients need and not what you only need, then you're much more likely to stay relevant and adapt where adaptation is required.
How about you, Jay? What sort of questions or challenges would you give to a friend of yours who is thinking about going independent?
Of course. Look, number one would be it's business development. I think that's a big. You don't really have to do that when you're in a corporate role. The work comes to you, and business development is the source of a lot of the highs and lows we've talked about. And you just sort of have to have that habit and build some habits that keep your relationships, current and fresh, and you need something to say. And that's a really big differentiator, I think, between people who are ultimately comfortable either starting firms or going out on their own and not. And so that I think that's something that's important to think about ahead of time is, can I get the business development habits, and am I going to be comfortable just, finding reasons to communicate with people that when I'm really not selling, I'm just trying to develop those relationships. And then look, some other things to be aware of would be certainly, at least the way I've run my practice, right? It's the cash flow is all over the place. So maybe I should listen to some other podcasts, and you may have some invoicing tips for me, Will, but I'll go, a couple of months and not see much come in, and then I'll have 6-figure receipts. So the cash flow part is sort of all over the place, and that's another thing that you just, if you can get comfortable with that or know that's kind of how it's going to go, I think that's helpful. And hey, one point of clarification: you talked about in your setup the pros versus cons of if you wanted to go back into a corporate role, if you wanted to go back into a corporate role, how you handle your independent period. Since I've done that, I've seen both sides of that. So I certainly, my phone rings for certain kinds of opportunities that are, I think, there because of my my independent consulting work. But like, I've also had the situation where, ex PE fund or ex person calls up and says, "Hey, are you really a general manager or are you a consultant?" And I get the other side of it too. So I don't know that always plays out the same way.
Yeah. Ashutosh, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. So questions that I would ask are, what are you trying to accomplish by going out on your own? And then what is your risk tolerance? Because there are some people who are going to say, I'm going to hang in this thing for 6 months or a year or a couple of years because I'm really going to try to make it work. But I think that's an honest question that you have to ask yourself, because as Jay just pointed out, there are times when you have a significant cash flow, and there are other times where the cash flow isn't that great. And can you become comfortable with that? So those are a couple questions I would ask anyone thinking about going this route.
Yeah.
It's not just the cash flow, it's the workflow, right?
Right.
Especially in the sole practitioner model, right? I'm always in the position of, oh no, I have too much work, and oh no, I have not enough work, because it's mostly just me.
Yeah. Well, hey, and how's your spouse going to be with it? Like my wife, Amy, has been fantastic. She's a professor at SMU, and like when, the first year, I think it made her nervous, but like over time, we've kind of figured out, hey, it kind of works out. And we've certain when I'm working like this, I try to make sure that I'm really communicating a lot about, here's biz dev pipeline and sort of what's going on. So she's comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The couple things on this. So one is, we several people have mentioned this piece about, you got to be comfortable about how a good part of your job is the business development, the client development side of it, sales, if you want to be, direct. And that's actually very hard to predict. So when I left McKinsey, as an engagement manager, I had never, sold work on my own, right? Or even been that closely involved with that piece of it. And so I had no experience at it. It turns out that I really enjoy that aspect of building relationships with people, seeing if I could be helpful, and that part's a lot of fun. And I had no idea. I'm a super strong introvert, and I don't like being in big crowds, but I enjoy that piece of it. And certain attitudes, it's hard to predict. So even if you think, oh well, I've never done that, and I don't have any experience, it's almost, if you haven't done it, it's really hard to say whether you like it. And even if you have done it in the context of a big firm, you could say, oh, as a partner at, name your big firm, it's very different in the independent world. And you might be great at it at a global consulting firm and struggle as an independent because you had your brand behind you. Or you may have struggled at the big firm, but do fantastic selling your own work. And to your point, Ashutosh, about risk tolerance, one thing I'd say is, some people get into this and they say, well, I'm just going to test the waters, going to see how it goes for a few months and just, see if I get any traction. And I think that that's a totally wrong approach, that half measures do not work. And it's a little bit of, Yoda here. It's like, there is no try. That if you're going to do this, some people do the half measures, after 3-4 months, they don't get traction and say, well, I didn't get traction, I'll go get a job. But that's because they haven't taken it seriously and come up with a name for your firm, a domain for your firm, built a website, built collateral, updated their LinkedIn profile, really got their positioning straight, maybe had a firm overview page, reached out to people, done, set up a CRM system, set up outreach, had calls. If you treat it like a real firm, like a professional, you're serious about it and you're in for the long term, people are going to take you a lot more seriously. Clients can sense if you're just, maybe doing it. And no client wants to hire a consultant who is likely to be out of the space in 6 months, right? Because they want someone, they've invested in you. There's some opportunity cost in that project. And even though they're paying you dollars, they're also paying you an opportunity cost. They could be getting another consultant up to speed on their company, and they want there at least be a reasonable chance that you're around a year from now. So clients can sense if you're taking half measures on this. One question for the group is, who should not go independent? If you're talking to a friend and you heard X, what would that X be for you to say, wow, this probably is not the right path for you?
Will, I'm just going to echo what you spent a few minutes talking about. If I heard someone say, I'm going to try this out, I'm not really sure, I want to see how it goes, I'll give it a little bit of time and then decide, I think I would say you should really reconsider whether or not you want to do this. Everyone that I talked to before I decided to go out on my own gave me the same advice. Like, you really have to jump with both feet in. I think I got that statement backwards or a little bit wrong, but you can't just, you have to really be committed to doing this and giving it a shot, a legitimate shot before you decide whether or not you want to stick with it. And what I would say is, the way that I've done that for myself is set goals for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and I keep revisiting them to make sure that I'm on track and really putting in the effort that I need to be putting in.
What sort of goals do you set, Ashutosh?
I mean, something as simple as how many articles do I want to write, or how many blog posts do I want to publish on LinkedIn in the next month? Who are the people that I want to talk to in the next 2 weeks? How many events have I participated in, which was a lot easier pre-pandemic, but even simple things like that, which seem very straightforward and basic, are little goals that you can help to make sure you're moving in the right direction and sticking with the plan.
So I love those process metrics that you're talking about. It's very hard to control the output or the outcomes, right? It's hard for us to control how many projects we're actually going to get or the revenue that we're going to achieve. But the things that you can control, how many outbound calls are going to make to clients, how many posts am I going to put on LinkedIn, or white papers produced, or those kind of things that are under your control, I feel are much better things to have KPIs around, other than just, I didn't hit the metric for my revenue, so beat myself up. But there's nothing actionable around that. What else? Who else would you say, don't take this route? Like, this is not for you, Andrew?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'm going to echo something nice that Jennifer said earlier around, and there is an entrepreneurial element to going independent. And maybe it is worth distinguishing, like, the transitional independence, which I see are very common now. Whereas there used to be a stigma, say 20 years ago, of people being in between jobs or maybe having been let go and being a temporary consultant, versus like really you're gonna do this for like 2, 3, 4, or 5 years. Other people, so I would say there is a bit of there's a lot of science about some genetics and some aptitudes and things that, not to say certain people can't do this, but you have to be comfortable with uncertainty. And so I'll flip it around. If someone is really comfortable with the regularity in their job, whether it's time, people, environment, I mean, none of these are deal breakers, but these are going to be like weighing against you. That's one. Second is, if you like staying with one discipline or one function, maybe like to hone that constantly. You could do that in the meta level with consulting, like maybe you're honing sales and you're honing marketing or client delivery. You can hone and craft in that way, but you can't be like, okay, I'm just going to do widgets in this one way for 10 years. Some people actually like to do that, and it's very secure and comforting for them. Again, another thumbs down for being independent. And then finally, there's the uncertainty. There's this double-edged, I don't mean to riff on the sales part too much, but I think there's the double-edged sword of sales and business development. Like, and I agree with Will, like, you may not know until you try it, or you might mine your past experiences. Like in my case, I'd seen client delivery with McKinsey, but I'd never been on the sales side. I didn't get very senior at McKinsey. But I had built a music performance business where I had to make gigs happen. I had to employ people, they're mostly contractors, but But once you try it, there's a double-edged thing. I think people who like landing the business, it's you do like a sale, you get a sales endorphin rush, right? When it's like I find I really like being accountable. It's like, and we're still mostly we're kind of like a 2.5 partner firm right now. We have a head of Japan and we have some senior people in my team now, but I'm still driving a lot of business, and that actually feels really good for me. But for many people that I talk to in my personal life, they're like, oh gosh, I would never want a job like that. Like, because that could be a lot of pressure to some people. For me, it's fun and it's adventure, and that's another reason I might have forgotten to mention that I quit my job, is that I wanted a bit more variety. And that's the last thing it's another reason I forgot to mention is the variety of learning that many people, even in very so-called exciting corporate jobs, will just be doing one function or one product for even on a fast time scale, like 2 years, if not longer. Whereas, even as a sole proprietor, you could do like 6-10 different projects over the course of a year. And I think again, that may not be for everybody, but I like that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
I did an experiment. I tried to have somebody else who lived in Florida to do the business development in Florida for me. This was around the time that AirTran was available. And so I thought, oh yeah, Atlanta to Florida, cheap flights, there and back, whatever you need. And it really didn't work because I hadn't productized myself. And it really is kind of, because I'm the sole practitioner flavor of independent consultant, Corporate Hartz they're kind of just buying me. And that was frustrating, but I was glad I tried it. So I didn't look back now and say, I should have tried that.
I'm going to build on something heard earlier, just around the business development piece, but it's related to that, which is one thing that if you're at a big firm, if other than reaching out to clients that tend to be a very limited section of the universe, right? It's only tends to be very Fortune 500, certain types of buyers at those Fortune 500, very senior people. Most of your energy and your focus in life is internally related. So if you're at McKinsey, probably most of your interactions are internally facing. And one thing that you might either like or dislike, but a lot of people do like about being an independent professional, is it just opens this whole universe of potential interactions much more broadly, where you could theoretically be collaborating with just about anyone that you meet, other consultants, a graphic designer, bring them on a project, a data science person, bring them in on a project, people in other countries, in your industry, in your function, people bringing you into their work, and a much broader set of companies could be your potential clients, because they don't have to be able to afford $1 million a month. So that's one thing that a lot of people, I think, like, is it just all of a sudden your whole world of interactions gets opened up to externally. The other thing in terms of risk tolerance is people think, oh, independent consulting, very risky proposition. Well, if you turn that around, maybe initially, but once you're established and you have a portfolio of 5, 6, 7 clients that you've served and you've started to build a reputation, that can actually be much more robust than a corporate career where you're senior vice president, executive vice president. You think, well, it's very stable because I had this long-term career there, but it's also very fragile, where it only takes one CEO to not like you, and all of a sudden you're out of a job. And that's a very hard job to find, and tends to be, like 8, 9, 12-month search for a new role. Whereas an independent professional, you have 7, 8 clients. One of them gets a new CEO, they don't like you. Okay, now you have 6 or 7 clients, and you go find another one to fill the gap. So while it seems more risky, it can actually long-term be more robust. So let's see. One question that we had here is, would you consider going back to a corporate role now that you've experienced, this path? Any thoughts there? Jay's gone back and forth, so maybe start with Jay.
Yeah, yes, and probably will. So, well, look, the point you were just on about uncertainty is like there's no certainty in any of these corporate jobs or any of these, certainly not C-level private equity jobs. So I mean, you're fooling yourself if you think that's like some, risk-free source of income. So like, could not agree more that really when you risk weight it, it's probably not as much riskier as people think to be an independent. But look, way I think about it is, I've have a nice book of work now. I'm evaluating and doing this lets me be choosy other operating situations. I'm going to look for something else to go run, and fingers crossed I'll be able to do that. And when the next one ends, I'll do this immediately again, right? Like why would you ever stop? Like, so it's, I none of the way I'm doing this, it was really by design, but I kind of like it because it sort of smooths out the transition spots and lets me be choosy. So, for sure. Hey, and by the way, I'm a buyer of independent consulting services when I'm in an operating job. So, participating in this network is helpful for a lot of reasons.
Well, let's close this out. Let's go around the horn and let's all share just one tip that you wish you had known when you started your practice. Is there one tip on any aspect of this that you think an executive would find helpful if she is planning to start her own practice? Anyone want to start? Andrew?
Yeah, I'll say three quick things. One is a unpaid promo for Umbrex. I'll tell them to go check out the great community Will Bachman's built. And this didn't exist, or I didn't know about you all when I quit my job 10 years ago. And so that's one. Two is there's a time lag to spool up that I don't think we discussed. Most corporations have, so you take it from initial meetings you might have that then lead to conversations, to opportunities. It can take 3 to 6 months till you get like the first penny, and then you add in corporate accounts payable, which is typically 30 to 90 days, depending on a few factors, after you invoice, right? And if you don't have an invoice rhythm that works to spread it out, like if you do only at the very end of the project, you could be like half a year before you make any money in a cash way. So that's one. That's the second thing. And then the third is, sorry to be so many, but since Will, you talked about just to empower the independents, I loved something you were implying earlier about ways to think about all the cool projects you could do. I love both finding people you'd love to work with or support, or they're doing cool projects that you find interesting or meaningful. And then to think of yourself very broadly as far as different dimensions. And this might sound very ex-McKinsey, since I'm ex-McKinsey, but think about like industry content is like, manufacturing in whatever industry. Then there's like functional content, well, maybe that's manufacturing. There's functional content like commercial, sales, marketing, and then there's also the types of things you could actually do, which would be like market research that maybe they can't do themselves. It could be staff augmentation, like they could do it themselves if they had 5 more people, but they don't, so you just join their team. And then there's also the expert advisory kind of projects. So there's like 5, 6 different dimensions you can play with over time that might help hopefully give some positivity and optimism for folks who might be trying it out for the first time.
Jay, can I pass it to you? What's 1 or 2 tips that you wish you had known when you started?
Oh, yeah, look, I think I like the way Andrew talks about it. Maybe this is a simplifying way to think about things, but I think if you focus on your relationships, like anybody you've enjoyed working with, you've had good chemistry with, you've done a good job for, focus on refreshing and building those relationships, and then follow the customer. So the way I read a lot of Andrew's comments is you find the people who believe in you and who, or per Jennifer, like really are buying you being there, and then go where they take you in terms of the problems you work on and the services you provide, and just be flexible. Let them lead you to the places you need help. So that's maybe my sort of meta point. And look, and then tactically, and you've done a good job of this, is just, get through all the administrivia, right? Just get a program for that, make decisions and get that done. And you've got great resources for that. Have an attorney. That's another one. My mother-in-law, believe it or not, served as my attorney, and having access to legal services has kept me out of a lot of trouble, and helped me get back in the grill of some private equity clients in particular in negotiations. But just work all that stuff out like you mean it, so that when you're in the moment, you're not trying to figure that out.
Ashutosh, your one or two tips?
Yeah, I would say the first tip is this one's really simple. Set a schedule, because I think being a solo like Jennifer, sometimes it's hard. You're like, I gotta write an article. I gotta make these client calls. I have to work on the client engagement that I have right now. So carve time out for all the different activities that you need to do and balance as a solo. And then the other thing that I would say, like Jay and Andrew, just to reiterate that, reach out to your network. I've talked to people that I haven't talked to since I was in college, and they have all been really great. And remember that people want to help you. We are all consultants. We help our clients, and there are a lot of people out there that are going to help you if you just ask for it.
Yeah. Jennifer?
I would go back to two things to think about and really write down on paper. One is what do you have to deliver to clients? What is that expertise that they need? We'll talk early on in this podcast about what does the client need? That is always going to be at the bottom. The second piece to really think about is, what do you need? One of the things that I needed was enough variety of experiences. So I've worked in every single department, every single industry, every single geography. I had a client in Chicago. I have had a client in Russia, and I'm a trivia queen now because I've seen a lot of different things and how they work. Is that engaging and inspiring to you, or is that scary? And you have to be really honest with yourself.
Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer. And let's see, just here in the chat, Andrew had the comment that, he gave Jay's a thumbs up about working with a real attorney, and that some independent consultants go to LegalZoom and pull templates, but really it does make a lot of sense to get an attorney. You're not going to run up tons and tons of hours. I point people who are interested in that to check out episode 12, way back at the beginning of this show, episode 12. I interviewed Matt Weil and we talked through those issues. You mainly need just a few different documents. You need a non-solicitation document. You need a non-disclosure agreement. You need a contract template for you to work directly with a client. You want to have a contract template for you to engage a subcontractor. So those three things are the main documents you need. Plus, you want to get an operating agreement for your LLC. If you're just an independent, truly sole proprietor, that is pretty straightforward, and your attorney probably has something right off the shelf that barely needs customized at all. If you have some partners, then it's a little bit more complicated because you need to negotiate termination and exit and all those sorts of things. But do work with an attorney. It's peace of mind and it makes sense. A couple tips that I'd add would be find other independent consultants in your space who you can talk to. It's a big ocean. You're not really competing with them. It's a lot of opportunities to collaborate, and finding other people who do the kind of work you do. You can find out what rates clients expect, what sort of statement of work, what sort of needs other consultants are seeing. It's really going to be the best source for being successful in this is finding other people.
I can't believe I forgot that. Not to jump in, but I really should give more credit to. I had two people, Clinton Anderson and Jay Grobe. I mean, more or less set me up. First go round and gave me the documents and told me, here's how you charge, here's what you do, and that is super critical. And like I don't know how you figure that out with somebody helping you.
It's so good to have a mentor. For me, it was Rosina Samadani and Joaquin Fisher. I'd call each of them like every couple of weeks. They were people I knew at McKinsey who had left, who had set up their firms before me, and their advice back in 2008, 2009, 2010 was so helpful to me. So find other people in your space to talk to. For some of just the overview, I will mention that right here on the website, if you go to umbrex.com, look for the guide. We have the Umbrex guide to setting up your own consulting practice. It's 90 videos plus also about 30 tools and templates you can download. So that's a useful reference where we put together in one program kind of everything you need to know, from legal setup to marketing to business development to financial piece. So check out that if you're thinking about getting started. That's everything that I wish I had known when I started my own practice. So Jennifer, Jay, Andrew, Ashutosh, thank you all so much for joining. For any listeners who want to follow up with any of those, I will include links to their websites as well as their LinkedIn profiles in the show notes. So thank you all for joining, and thanks for listening to this episode of Unleashed.